Chess YouTube, it is only move 19, and what does Magnus Carlsen, the greatest chess player of all time, do right here in this position? He sacrifices the rook. Rook takes g7 is the move, giving up the rook. Shout out to Gotham Chess, by the way. And from there, this entire game was absolutely insane. You don't want to miss this. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game here, Magnus playing as white in this 3-0 Thursday tournament on chess.com from literally last week. He does open 1d4, and black does go 1d5. Then we have c4, the queen's gambit opening, offering the pawn on c4, and black does decline the pawn with the most common move here for black. That is the move e6, the queen's gambit declined. Now, Magnus here has many options. You can play the Catalan, you can play the four knights variation, you can play some other sidelines, but in this game, he goes for the absolute strongest, most classical, most principled response, and he plays the queen's gambit decline exchange variation, starting with knight c3, knight f6, c takes d5, trading on d5, black takes back, and then finally bishop to g5. This right here is the oldest, strongest line for white in this entire queen's gambit decline opening, and it's very ambitious. White's idea eventually is to go e3, bishop d3, queen c2, maybe even knight g to e2, and eventually f3 and e4, getting a big attack in the center. Now, of course, black's going to have a wide variety of ways to respond, but the big factor here right now is white has a lot of pressure on that pawn on d5. For example, right now, white's actually threatening to capture on f6, and if the queen takes back, you win the pawn on d5. And instead, if the g-pawn takes back, black's entire kingside pawn structure is simply ruined. So with that in mind, black's two most common ideas here are simply bishop e7, blocking the pin, and also c6, defending d5. But in the game, Alexey, he plays a slightly different idea. That is the very ambitious move, bishop b4, flying out with the bishop and pinning that knight on c3 to the king on the e1 square. Now, what are black's big ideas right here in this opening? To be honest, black at some point is going to try to go h6, and if bishop h4, then go g5, bishop g3, and knight to e4, jumping in with that knight. For example, let's say e3, h6, bishop h4, then g5, bishop g3, knight e4. That is kind of the big idea for black in this opening, piling up pressure on knight and c3. Black may even go c5 and queen to a5, further increasing the pressure. So if Magnus is not careful, he'll be under a very big attack here. Now, in the game, he does start e3, and black does go h6. Now, again, the main line is going back to h4, but instead, Magnus here, he throws a little bit of a curveball, and he plays a slightly weaker idea, a bishop to f4. Now, what is the idea behind this? Magnus, he knows going back to h4 is the stronger move, but he also knows that's the one his opponent is expecting. That's what he wants. So instead, against the Russian super GM Alexey, he goes back to the f4 square like this, simply maintaining the tension and therefore making g5 a little bit less attractive, as white could go, for example, bishop e5, pinning that knight to the rook, and so on, getting a decent attack going. Now, here, Alexey plays the move short castles, a logical idea by black, short castles on the board, and white does go bishop d3, finding the best overall square for the bishop, controlling f5, and stopping black here from going bishop f5 himself. From here, Alexey finds the strongest idea, that is c5, gaining space on the queen side, counterattacking on d4, and in general, the move c5 here does synergize very well with the move bishop b4. So, typically, when black goes here with the bishop, black also tries to go c5 with that pawn like this. Now here, Magnus, he plays the move knight e2, a solid idea, defending d4 and c3 with that knight. Very solid stuff here. And Alexey is going to have several different responses. The main problem here for black is you don't really have a lot of play in the center yet. I mean, d4 is very well guarded, and all your queenside pieces are still undeveloped. With that in mind, black could say bring out either of these pieces or trade on d4 or even go c4, gaining space. In the game, Alexey here, he does go knight to c6, a solid choice by black, and white does castle. Short castles is on the board. All right, from here, black has many different responses once again. Again, you can trade on d4 and even give white the isolated d-pawn in return. For example, c takes, knight takes, e takes would be a decent option, but instead, in the game, bishop to e6 was chosen, defending d5 with that bishop. All right, in this position, Magnus, he finds a way to really increase the pressure on the black position, and he finds the very good move of simply a3, putting the question to the bishop, where do you want to go? Now, you can go back to a5, but the drawback with that, if you go to the a5 square, Magnus then could take on c5, the pawn would be undefended, and from there threaten b2 to b4, basically hanging on to the extra pawn on c5 forever. So with that in mind, Alexey here, in this position, after a3, he's almost forced to trade on c3 like this. Bishop takes c3 is the move right here. From here, b takes c3 is chosen, and now we have a completely different pawn structure. This pawn structure is very common in, for example, the Rogozin variation of the Queen's Gambit decline of the QGD. And now there are a few different factors here. Black at some point may want to go c4, clamping down on the queen side, and from there trying to go, for example, b5, a5, and b4, pushing the pawn majority. Now, instead of that, white also at some point could trade on c5, at which point both sides would have a series of very, very weak pawns on the queen side remaining. Now, from here, instead of all that, Black in the game plays the move knight to h5, the idea being trying to attack the bishop on f4, and pretty much no matter what, the bishop will be lost. There's simply no good square to go to with the bishop. Everything is being covered by the black pieces, which that is kind of a big deal, as those two Bs for white right now on f4 and d3 are very, very valuable. However, Magnus, he doesn't mind that much. He knows even if you lose the two Bs, you're still doing quite well as white in this position. So he simply trades on c5. D takes c5, the idea being eventually black might win back that pawn. However, it's going to take him a long time, and in the meantime, white can build up other advantages, maybe even pressure d5 or the bishop and so on. All right, black here trades on f4, and white takes back with the knight, a logical choice, pressuring the bishop, pressuring d5, and so on. And f4 is actually a very, very good square for that knight in this position. All right, Alexey, queen to e7, a solid multi-purpose idea. The idea being, first of all, you support e6, but also attack the pawn on c5, and finally connect those rooks on the back rank like this. A very good idea indeed. Magnus, rook b1, increasing the pressure, targeting b7. And here Alexey plays the somewhat surprising move. He gives up the pawn on b7. And he plays the move queen takes c5 here, winning that pawn on the c5 square. Now the pawn falls, but so does b7, a very double-edged idea. And Magnus here, he's never seen a free pawn he didn't like, and he does take this pawn. Rook takes b7 is the move by the goat. Not a brilliant move, a very obvious one, but certainly a good move here for white. All right, from here, Alexey, he spots two free pawns on a3 and c3, and he does opt to win the pawn on the c3 square. Queen takes c3 is the move, but in this position, things are already getting a little bit difficult for black, and the big problem is every white piece, minus maybe the rook, is starting to eye the black king, the rook on the 7th rank, the knight eyeing the bishop eyeing h7, and the queen eyeing g4 potentially, which would target g7. And here, Magnus, he shows why he really is the GOAT, and he finds a very simple way to just maximally increase the pressure on the opponent and set up a lot, and I mean a lot, of different tactical threats. He starts with the move knight takes e6, very obvious. Black takes back, and from here, queen to g4 is the idea, and suddenly white has a lot of pressure on g7. Alexey, he sees this, and he maintains the defense, and he slides back with the rook. Queen to f6 is chosen in this game. Now, at first glance, things look defended. The pawn on g7 is being supported twice by the queen and the king. It's attacked twice by the queen and the rook. So you may say, all right, black surely has that square covered, right? Well, it turns out he does not. Magnus Carlsen here, what does he do? He sacrifices the rook. Shout out to Gotham Chess. So giving up the rook, and here's the idea. It is a simple deflection sacrifice. Well, not simple, but very elegant, very beautiful, very majestic. The deflection sack. The point being the queen must take the rook. If you don't do that, I mean, you're as good as cooked. So the queen takes the rook, but then the pawn on e6 falls. And here's the problem. Queen takes e6 check, hits the king and the knight with the fork. The king moves, or you block the attack with, for example, queen to f7 is chosen in the game by Alexey, the Russian super GM, and then simply queen takes c6. All right, let's slow down here and take inventory. So far in this game, Magnus here, he has the bishop and two pawns versus the rook. Who's better? Well, it turns out a bishop and 2 pawns are worth about as much as the rook, but the big difference here is the black king is incredibly exposed. That king is just naked and afraid, like my dad's favorite TV show, Naked and Afraid, and white's going to have very good chances here to apply maximum pressure on the black king. But keep in mind, this is a 3-0 Thursday tournament, meaning both sides do not have an increment. Both sides have about 2 minutes left to make literally all of their moves, so both sides will be under extreme time pressure as the game progresses. So let's see what happens. From here, black, king to g7 is chosen, sliding up with the king. The point being, perhaps the king maybe is better placed here. I'm not really sure, but king g7 was the move chosen in the game. Comment below if you think you know why this was the move. Now that I think about it, that move doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I'm the one commentating. I'm supposed to know these things, so comment down below if you think you know why that is the move there for Alexey Serrano. All right, queen c5 chosen by the GOAT, dropping back with the queen, pressuring a7, just finding generally a good square for the queen, defending a lot of key squares, and so on. Black, rook a d8, defends the pawn, or over defends the pawn, shall I say, and Magnus, queen d4, centralizing, hits the king on g7, the move I don't really understand very much, and the king is forced to go back to the g8 square. King to g8 chosen in the game, confirming to me that maybe I'm not losing my mind for not knowing why king g7 was chosen to move earlier, but again, comment down below, let me know what you think. All right, Magnus, g3, a simple move, trying to give his king some loft on g2 if it needs it later in the game. And queen g7 is chosen by Alexey, offering the queen trade. Now, Magnus, this guy has never seen an endgame he didn't like, but for some reason, he avoids the queen trade. Queen to c5, chosen in the game, keeping the queens on the board, at least for right now. Alexey, rook f7, sitting and waiting, a solid move. And Magnus here, he gets a little bit impatient. There are plenty of ways here to further improve the position. For example, rook to d1, or rook b1, or even rook c1. Finding a better square for that rook could be one idea, but instead here, he decides it is time to simply go for it, and he plays the move e4, gaining space in the center, trying to open up the game for his bishop and his queen, and so on. Black here, rook c7, hits the queen on c5. The queen must move, queen to a5 chosen, maintaining a good amount of tension on both of these rooks on c7 and the d8 squares. Now, Alexey, queen to c3 is the move, flying down with the queen, offering again the queen trade, and also pressuring a3, and very importantly, the bishop on d3. All right, Magnus, in response, queen to b5, maintains the defense of the bishop, but gives up the pawn on a3 in the process. Okay, Alexey, he doesn't take the pawn. Queen to c6, once again offering the trade of queens, and Magnus again declines. Queen b1 is the move. We have rook b7, targets the queen on the b1 square. Queen to a2 gets out of the way of the attack, and once again, queen c3. Both sides kind of sharking around here, trying to find some sort of tactical opening and force out a mistake by the opponent. Magnus here, queen to e2, sliding over, again giving up the defense of the pawn on the a3 square. And again, black declines. Rook to e7, putting the pin on the pawn on e4 to the queen on the e2 square. It's almost always in chess a good idea to line up the rook with the queen like this, so a decent idea by Alexey. Magnus here, queen g4, check, hits the king. Queen g7 blocks the attack, and queen d1 slides back. Now we have king to h8, bishop c2, queen to e5, and Magnus here, he finally finds a way to turn up the heat, and he plays the very strong but very committal move, f4, gaining space, driving back the queen, and the response is queen c3 and then e5. So in this position, both sides here have some new passed pawns. White having those two passed pawns on e5 and f4, and black on the d5 square. And from here, literally anything can happen, especially in time pressure in a game like this in 3-0 Thursday. All right, black, rook b8, sliding over with the rook, eyeing b2 with that piece. Magnus, rook to f2, blocking along the second rank. Black, rook b2 comes in all the same. However, rook c7, pressuring the bishop, may have been a little more precise. Rook b2 chosen though, and white here, queen to h5, flying up with the queen, targeting h6, a very good move indeed. Black here, queen c6, trying to defend that pawn on the h6 square, and now we have queen to f5, sliding over, the audacity of the GOAT, threatening checkmate ideas in one move if the black rook is ever to move off the e7 square. From here, king to g8 is chosen, king g2 getting off the back rank, and here Alexey Serrano on move 40. I mean, both sides under extreme time pressure here. He does make a rather critical mistake. He plays the move d4 check. Now, what could be wrong with this? It turns out white can simply go bishop e4, blocking the attack, hitting the queen, and white begins to sort of take over, as that pawn served a very important function of guarding the e4 square and blocking the bishop from getting an outpost on there. Now, instead, d4 is chosen, and bishop e4 is the response, and again, taking full advantage of that very weak square e4 with the bishop. Black trades rooks. We have rook takes f2, king takes, and then queen to b6, sliding over, defending the pawn on d4. From here, bishop d3 slides back with the bishop, and black queen b2 check hits the king on the f2 square. We have king to f3, queen b7 check once again, and now here, bishop e4, again blocking the attack by the queen. From here, queen b3 chosen, hits the king to g4, queen to f7, offering the trade. And finally, Magnus, in this position, he does trade queens and goes into a very strong endgame. We have queen takes, king takes, and now king to f5, marching up with the king in this position. Now, keep in mind here, both sides have less than 20 seconds to make literally every single move. There is no increment. It is 3-0 Thursday. Anything can happen here. Black, rook c7, sliding over. Bishop d5, hits the king. King to e7, sliding over again. And now king to e4. Black, rook c3, sliding down with the rook. And here, Magnus, he's got to find the right move. It turns out it's not actually that easy to find the right continuation. In the game, Magnus, he does not trade. He plays the move f5 here, ignoring the free pawn on d4. It turns out taking on d4 is by far, my computer won't lag, by far the best continuation here. Instead, f5 chosen in the game, and this move right here is far, far weaker because now black has the option of going d3 like this, and from there, the pawn is almost unstoppable, and black technically has the winning game according to Stockfish, my good friend, the computer engine. Now, instead, in the game, Alexey, he trades on a3. Rook takes a3 is the move, a big mistake, and Magnus begins to fight back in this game. As you can see by the eval bar on your left, skyrocketing for the goat. We have f6, hits the king, king to d7, e6, hits the king again, king to d6, and now e7, threatening to promote in literally one move. Black here does the only thing he can do, that is rook to e3, sliding over, hitting the king. The king is forced to move. King takes d4 is the response. And then we have rook to e1, sliding down with the rook and maintaining control of the e8 square with that rook. Now from here, Magnus, bishop e4 is the move. And we have, if you're a student of the game, it's almost like a Philidor's position with the bishop instead of the rook. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. Don't worry about it. But like a bishop's Philidor position on the board. Very, very cool stuff. All right, from here, black, king to d7, sliding up with the king. Bishop f5 hits the king, and then king to d6, again sliding out of the way of the attack. We have bishop g6, guarding e8. Black here's got to do something. He hits the king, rook d1, check, king c3, rook e1, and here in this position, Magnus, the finishing blow, or so it seems. The move is e8, promoting to a queen. Black takes, white takes, and here Alexey, with the 1 second left on the clock, he fights on until the very, very bitter end. We have king to e6, f7, king e7, g4, king f8, h4, h5, g5, and in this position, Alexey Sarana, he finally runs out of time on the clock, meaning Magnus Carlsen, with his Gotham Chess inspired rook takes g7 on move 19, he does win the game. What an incredible game between Magnus and Alexey Sarana in this 2025, November 2025, 3-0 Thursday Blitz game. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Real fast, do you guys like this new layout that I have? Let's see if I can do it correctly. This layout that I have for you. I think it's pretty cool. Let me know down below if you like this new layout with like the player images and the quotes and the all this stuff. The tournaments way up. You can't see it, but like way up in your top left area of your screen and so on. So let me know your feedback. And by the way, if you want to learn directly from me, a 2000 ELO online player, my real name is Dr. Mike Jansen. If you want to learn from me, head on over to drmikechess.com. That is my online coaching program. I've got so many ways there to help you, group coaching, courses, community, and so on. And also, if you want to challenge me, my username on Elite Chess and chess.com is down below, drmikechess1. So hit me up there, whatever you want to do, and I'll see you in the next video.